Hello and welcome to Weird Together, that show where we celebrate the latest and greatest in independent horror films. I'm Brennan Storr, host of the Ghost Story Guys podcast.
I'm Joseph Kamau, host of The Cardinal Rule.
And we're not critics.
We're not experts.
We're just weird. Together. Joseph, my friend, how you doing?
I'm actually doing really good. You know, another part of my world and life is sports. That's kind of what I do for my other YouTube thing. And tomorrow is my sports Christmas. My favorite event of the year in sports is the NFL draft. So today is Christmas Eve from a sports level for me. So, you know, for maybe horror fans, that might not resonate. But for me, I'm in very good spirits because tomorrow I get to begin a 3-day excursion into the depths of sports nerddom. So, Bren, how are you?
That's fabulous, my friend. I'm good. I just came in the door minutes ago, as you know, panting because I had to get across town from the Doug Stanhope show at La Nationale. So I went from stand-up comedy immediately onto it. Literally, I had to actually leave the show in progress, across the street, down a million flights of stairs to the metro. And I just had these nightmare visions that the train was going to, you know, because the trains in Montreal, they'll stop for no reason. I say it for no reason. They announce it in French, but that may as well be no reason. And you could just be sitting there for 100 years. And it's about a 45-minute walk, and I'm not real fast. So, yeah, thankfully the what do you call it? The public transit cooperated. But there was a moment where I was a little bit like, shit, this could be, can I do this from my phone? And I was asking myself.
So what you're saying is if the trains weren't running, neither was Bren.
Correct. Yep. Be doing this from far, far underground. Thankfully, we did not have to do that because I'm going to spend enough time down there eventually.
Well, I'm glad you made it. Let's say hey to, we have someone in the chat, Rin already. Rin Lemieux, thanks for being here. Good evening, gentlemen. We appreciate you and your continued support. If anyone else is hanging out with us, throw a hello in the chat and we'll definitely get you up there on the screen there. Thank you very much, Rin.
Yes. Hello, Rin. Of course, my good friend, Rin. So, Joseph, we are here today to talk about a film which I was wholly unaware of until about 10 days ago. And that film is Unwelcome. And Unwelcome tells the story of a city couple who moves to Ireland, to his ancestral home. And, well, they run into trouble with both the natural world and the world of man. And it really goes places I think you would not expect, especially based on the cover art, which I think is terrible. But, of course, we will talk about all of that later in the show. But before we can talk about Unwelcome, as we say with any film, you don't go into a movie blind. You never go in totally clean. With every movie you watch, there's baggage. All right, Joseph, what, if any, baggage did you have going into Unwelcome?
Well, you know, I wasn't familiar with the film, but I do enjoy films that are set in Ireland and that are films that are based in Irish lore. Going back to when I was a child, you know, I forget the film. It's a well-known film that had banshees as a key kind of, antagonist and I just always enjoyed that kind of a thing. So I liked that right from the beginning. And something I didn't realize going in, but ultimately was baggage for me is, you know, as a person who has a family, you know, married with children, some of the scenes with violence and fears of violence and protecting your family ended up certainly striking a note because of that aspect of, you know, my identity and experience. We'll talk about that a little bit more later because there's some interesting points about that I want to get into. Yeah.
I'm very curious to hear your perspective on this. As for me, I went in more or less blind. I was not familiar with the filmmaker, although I have since watched one of his films, which we'll talk about in the Toctagon. And the cover art I thought was terrible. This was one of my random picks. You know, I was flipping through what's new on Google Play, just renting things at random. And, we as we discussed on the episode that just came out, Freeze, which you can find if you look for Weird Together on your podcast platform of choice. We did that episode because we were going to watch this. We watched this other movie and we just could not bring ourselves to talk about it. It was too painful. We tried talking about it, and the episode was a car crash. So we pivoted, and so we had to kind of do two different movies very quickly close together. So I just grabbed Unwelcome, watched it, and thought, oh, no, this is actually great. It's a great choice. I, too, am a fan of Irish horror films, stuff like Devil's Doorway, A Dark Song. I know Irish director Lee Cronin just had a massive hit with Evil Dead Rise, which is a crazy intense movie. I watched that night before last. Don't order food before watching that movie. That was a mistake I made. Got myself some nachos, and then people started getting ripped apart, and I didn't want my nachos anymore.
That's fair. Real quick, Derek is here with us, Street Right. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us, Derek.
Hey, Derek, good to see you. I will be back on your side of the country in about 35 days, thereabouts, something like that. I'll be back in Victoria, leaving behind my beloved Montreal, because apparently 2 rents are expensive, Joseph. This is what I've learned.
Good to know.
And also I miss my wife. Mostly I miss my wife. But
yeah, of course.
Got to pretend like it's a money thing, because otherwise I'm going to seem like a big softie.
Right.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about Unwelcome, and there's only one place 2 men such as us can do this, Joseph, and that's at Octagon.
Welcome to the Octagon. 2 men enter, 2 men leave.
All right, my friend. So
I missed that sting.
I have also missed that sting. It's not the same when I add it in afterwards to the like the audio shows. It does lack a little something. So I'm really curious to know what you thought of Unwelcome.
Well, overall, I liked the film a lot. I think a lot of the reviews and ratings kind of gave it sort of a 2 out of 4 stars, 3 out of 5 stars, and it's probably somewhere in that range in my book too. Maybe a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10. But overall, I really enjoyed it a lot for some of the reasons we talked about. I thought the acting, the cinematography, the locations were all really good, really solid. And some of that I think is maybe we're so used to looking at independent films, and this is a small budget. Right. This is a small budget film, but it's out of a major, studio. So that certainly it had a little more going for it in terms of resources. But yeah, overall, I liked it. There were a few things that we'll get into later that maybe weren't my favorite, but overall, I found myself enjoying the film pretty much all the way through.
Yeah. One thing that I didn't get to in the plot summary is that, of course, this couple, they suffer this terrible assault, which we'll talk about. Mm-hmm. They move to Ireland and they discover that Jamie, the fella, his aunt, has left him the house, but every day she left an offering of liver at the back garden, because she believed in the old ways. She believed that the Fardarig, which are a kind of little people, which we will not be joking about on this show. Just make that clear. That they had to be sated, they had to be fed, they had to have an offering, a blood offering given to them. And I like movies that explore folklore as if it's basically the place where real life, I shouldn't say real life and folklore, but where kind of the world of technology and the world of folklore intersect. So in the film, when the Fardarig finally do turn up, it's this great marriage of just total disbelief and folklore craziness. And I really thought that was cool.
Yeah. And, you kind of alluded to this. I was curious what you thought of it, because I know that you have a profound respect for the fair folk. Mm-hmm. And, so when in the film, when an old Irish woman tells you to respect the old ways, you listen. The old man saying, "Fuck the fairies," as he was, kind of walking home drunk, was probably not wise. But yeah, now, for folks who might not be familiar with this, do you feel comfortable speaking a little bit about why you have such reverence for the fair folk?
So most of the folks who watch this show or who will listen to it afterwards, they probably know the Ghost Story Guys. If you don't, hello. Ghost Story Guys is a show I co-host with Paul Bestel, and we have been doing it for 6 years now, for almost 2.5 with Paul. And we tell true life stories of the paranormal. And there was a time when I didn't take this stuff very seriously at all. And we did an episode on the fair folk. It was pretty glib. And now, of course, the stout rationalists out there are going to say, well, what, something happened? Well, a lot of little stuff happened. Would it have happened anyways? Maybe. But it happened after I said those dumb things. And consequently, I felt like this is a sign. And then I want to say a couple of years later, we did an episode about Ireland, episode 80, I think it was. And I kind of forgot myself and said some dumb things again. And consequently, we had a bunch of things go bad again. And so I just learned to be very respectful. And And so now I'm very cautious and respectful is the word when discussing these topics. And so I did have some hesitation, but ultimately I thought, no, it's fine. We're not, we're talking about movies. We're not talking about, the reality or otherwise of certain things. But yeah. And it's funny too, because I think the film in a lot of, the director is Jon Wright, who's originally Irish, now living in England. He has said the film was meant to be about an exploration of violence and, how you approach violence and what happens if you try to avoid violence. If you try to run away from conflict constantly, eventually it can just find you. And if that's something that happens in the film, because as the film opens, Jamie and I'm blanking on her name, Maya. Jamie and Maya are very, like urbane, upper class, digital nomad type people living in a flat in London, in a reasonably nice flat in a reasonably nice building. And then they are attacked by these thugs, basically, who harass Jamie. And shortly after they find out she is pregnant, Jamie goes to get a bottle of non-alcoholic champagne to celebrate. He tells these guys off because they're talking shit to him, and they sneak into the apartment and they just beat the bejesus out of both him and Maya. And it's a really hard scene to watch. Like I actually had to kind of fast forward through it when I watched the film a second time, because there are some funny bits in the film, definitely, but that scene is not played for laughs, and it is rough. And that transforms both the relationship, but also Jamie, because Jamie seems increasingly separated from his masculinity. He becomes this fountain of repressed rage, and it affects how he functions throughout the rest of the film.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing that I alluded to in the baggage, in terms of, there is this sort of primal fear, this sort of long-standing evolutionary fear, I think, in terms of our psychology. As a father and a husband, the responsibility I feel to keep my family safe, right? And how you do that, there's a lot of ways you do that. In our contemporary society, you do that by having, a career and buying a house that has doors that lock, and things like that.
I'm in trouble, Joseph.
Yeah. But, society's largely kind of put most of us in a place where we kind of don't have to deal with those types of violence, except for very rare occasions, that are really sad and tragic and unfortunate. But like, there were elements of the film where you see that helplessness in those moments, both with the sort of the guys hanging out on the curb, the whatever you want to call them, in the urban setting, and then the Wayland family and the being in the house and kind of encroaching and kind of having their way, and just sort of that almost being the fear of being dominated in a weird way, and someone kind of hurting someone you care about, and your children and the person you love, and just all of that. Those moments definitely hit that note, and definitely kind of hit on that fear. And that's one of those things that kind of coming into this film I didn't realize would be something I would that would kind of resonate, might not be the right word, but because it certainly wasn't in a positive way, but certainly that kind of impacted my experience watching the film.
Yeah, no, I wasn't expecting that either. I wasn't sure what to expect because I didn't know much about the film. But that scene, as I said before, that really hit home for me. And I think there is a rich tradition especially in modern English cinema, of this fear of street crime, and the sort of these hoodlums or hoodies as an other. That scene specifically reminded me of, I think it's Kieran Foy, the director. He directed a film called Citadel, which is about people living in a building which is essentially besieged by these thugs. But in that film, they're almost this sort of amorphous mob. They don't have a unique identity. They're just sort of a single force working together. And it's that sort of what do you call it, like urban fear, basically, like the in the 80s, that was a big thing, this idea that cities were becoming unmanageable hellscapes, and the 70s too. I mean, obviously, like Death Wish, that's kind of where films like that were born. But even in the 80s, films like John McTiernan's Nomads with Pierce Brosnan, is this really interesting. I mean, it's a horror film, but it's a really fascinating look at the urban paranoia of the time. And again, in modern times, as crime in England has gotten worse, this has become really rich ground. And again, I just thought that he nailed the film. And actually, it's sort of interesting because you mentioned the cinematography. Another artist this film reminded me of was Johannes Roberts, the director, who is English, but he shot at least one film in Ireland. He did a film about a giant eagle or a giant bird. I can't remember the name of it right now. But he is a horror director who just has this incredible visual sense. And there was something I really enjoyed in one of the opening shots where it starts out above their flat and sort of tracks down, and it frames all the people in these windows working in these offices above, in this block. But it frames them individually, like they're all separated from each other. And it just makes this very expensive building look like a prison.
Yeah.
And I love that because it's so reflective of where those two start their lives. And even after Jamie and Maya go to Ireland, this is where I think sort of the colonizer subtext comes into play, because they try to continue their walled off urban way of life in a place where that is not how anyone lives. And they get angry when no one else will sort of respect those boundaries because they don't understand that's not how people live here. And they don't understand that by trying to impose that, they are othering themselves.
Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, with, you had Maeve, right? I guess the friend of the family who, kind of
Neve.
Was the person that, I'm sorry?
Neve.
I'm sorry. Maeve. And she's kind of the first person they encounter there. And she's very kind. And she says, hey, there's this thing that needs to be done, and I'm happy to take care of it for you. And they're immediately very off put by the idea that she would be on their property on a daily basis. And so there's certainly that note. And then, when the Whalen family's sort of making themselves at home a little too comfortable and when they try to kind of put their foot down, Jamie in particular, they kind of invoke sort of the old grudges, the old scars of, the British coming to Ireland. They kind of invoke that history in their kind of resentment there. So a lot of interesting kind of juxtaposition of those two cultures right there.
What I thought was particularly unique about that was that both sides are right and both sides are wrong in that argument, because obviously Jamie and Maya, they're well-to-do people who obviously can work from anywhere with their jobs. They've been given this house in Ireland. He's technically a quarter Irish, so they kind of belong there. But, they're going to live in this house and contribute to it, and they'll spend money in the local economy. And so, they're a net positive. But also, they refuse to conform in any way to the way that everyone else around them lives. So they're assholes. And the Whelans, who are the people that Jamie hires to work on their roof, despite kind of being told, they're not great. They're Irish, and they don't like the fact that English people are coming to live in their country and so on and so forth. But they're also assholes because they're lazy thieves. And I thought that Jon Wright and the writer, I cannot remember his name, Mark something, it's gone right out of my head. But I thought they had this really keen sense of this very particular kind of person who they use heritage as a way to kind of shore up their otherwise completely empty character. I've seen people do this in Canada. They'll say, well, I'm a Canadian and we do this and this is how we live. And my grandfather fought in the war. Yeah, but what does it have to do with it? You've done fuck all.
Right.
You work at the sawmill, you shoot at beer cans. I mean, that's fine. Do what you're going to do, but don't think this gives you some kind of moral high ground. And that's the characters of the Whelan family. They're such shits. But they use like Michael Collins. They make a joke about, he's Michael Collins himself when Jamie tries to claim some kind of Irish. But ultimately, like, do they really give a shit? No. This is just a way to continue to other these people because their net contribution to the society. Like later, when the one Whelan boy is accused of theft, and he just loses his mind, but he did steal from Jamie. We see him. He has stolen several times from them. He's invaded their privacy. He leaves a turd in their toilet. He's just garbage, but being cold garbage. Oh no, he flies off in a handle. And we've all met that guy, the guy who's a lazy, lousy bastard who, if you call him on any of his shit, all of a sudden he's a folk hero in his own head. and everyone else just really wishes he'd get struck by lightning.
Yeah. The name you were looking for, I believe, is Mark Stay, the writer.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, Mark Stay, the writer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely a really insightful look at that. There are kind of, both sides have a nugget of truth, kind of a point, but both are also kind of off. Maybe I'm sympathize, more with the protagonists, Jamie and Maya, in terms of they're a little less shitty than
100%. Yeah, no,
but yeah, not conforming though. Yeah.
They are more sinned against than sinning. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But again, I think they're meant to be an example of that sort of English colonial rule, because they come to this place and again, Neve tells them, you got to do this thing. And the first thing that Maya does is just shit all over it.
Yeah.
She just like condescends to this woman. Like she's talking to a not very clever child. And it's just that, and that's the story of the colonizer, right? Like, you have gods, you pray, there are spirits in these woods. Give me a fucking break. We're going to put a Jamba Juice over there. That's just kind of what they do.
I thought Maeve's response was kind of interesting because she had this smile that was this big smile, but behind it was this something else. And it felt like, how people who are used to dealing with colonizers or ethnocentric pieces of shit or whatever, people who are used to dealing with condescending assholes just know how to patronize them just enough to kind of give them what they want. But it's usually the person who is being condescended against, who is usually in the know, has the clue. And there was just something behind Maeve's smile that just like, she knew full well what was going on in this dynamic. She knew who this couple was. She knew what they were about, and she knew how she had to kind of defer to them just enough to try to get them to do what she wanted them to do. But when they didn't, she laid into it, right? She pulled her aside. It's like, this is important. So there was interesting dynamic, and the actor who played Maeve, I think, did an outstanding role. Probably one of my favorite performances, kind of subtly in the film, is how she played that character.
Oh yeah, because that's such a common thing. We think if someone believes these things, I can't tell you the number of people who've talked to me like I'm stupid because I do a show about ghosts. And it's always very subtle. Well, okay, not always. Sometimes it's not subtle at all. But there's this very much like, oh, you believe in these things, hey? Okay.
Bless your heart.
Bless your heart, right? Oh, well, is the spirit in the room with us right now? Get the fuck out of here. I'm not a psychic. I tell stories, man. But this is a thing that people will do. And I mean, being someone who is, sort of seen as like, I'm the whitest man on the planet. So I don't have to deal with the colonizer bullshit. I just have to deal with intellectual condescension. But having then to some other bozo who comes in and like, this, you believe in this is your culture. I believe in these things because I've seen things and I've experienced things that just don't have any other explanation. But to come in and, no, this is what we believe. This has been passed down forever. Oh, that's cute. We believe in self-reliance and money and bullshit. And to just have to swallow that over and again, watch these people get chewed up and spit out, because everything that happens in the film could have been avoided if they adapted to living the way the people in that village live.
Yeah.
If they had just waited to get the roof fixed, if Jamie had just gotten a tarp and some fucking cinder blocks and some wood and just covered the hole in the roof until someone could fix it, they would have never had the Whalens on the property. They never would have had the Straw Dogs-esque finale. They never would have had all the creepy bullshit that happened. And if they had just listened to Neve and just kept leaving the tribute every day, you don't even have to
let her do it. Let her do it.
Let her do it. She's willing to do it. The whole film would have just been people telling jokes at the pub and singing.
Yeah. On an aside, I enjoyed the scene when they went to the pub for the first time. The way they set up the very awkward, everyone staring at them.
Yes.
I'm like, oh boy, whatever. So that was fun because it felt like the cliche sort of, oh no, everyone's staring at the new people, but they're actually, like most people are fine, lovely people who were very friendly at the pub. So I enjoyed that little bit there.
Oh yeah, yeah, because it does that thing again where it subverts the expectation. Because again, you're expecting a small town. Oh, they're going to be really shitty and not trust the outsiders, and they're going to hate you because you're English. Like, no, they'll accept you.
Yeah.
But these guys immediately go about alienating all these people. You know, I mean, the way they behave, they're such condescending dicks to all these people who are being nothing but kind to them. You know, this woman says, "Oh, I got a bunch of baby clothes. You have to take them. They're all yours. I insist." And the look on their face is like they're dealing with simpletons, because that is how they come. That is how they view kindness. Oh, you must be simple, you know. And like, no, these people have seen some shit. They've they collectively have lived through a lot. But that is oftentimes what makes you a more giving person is when you've been through some shit. Oftentimes, people who just kind of cruised, they don't develop the empathy. And honestly, even Jamie and Maya at the beginning, you know, she views everything through the prism of her pregnancy. So, you know, Neve is telling her, well, hey, I'm just going to come into your property. I'm just going to leave the offering. It's fine. And she makes everything about her. No, I have to feel safe because of this pregnancy. I have to feel safe. And well, I mean, you're coming up with an excuse to try and control the situation. And again, that control blows up in their face.
So what you just mentioned, it reminds me of something a little bit sociological. Oh, here we go. You're gonna enjoy this. So the German sociologist Ferdinand Tönnies had these concepts, and these are older concepts. I mean, Tönnies, lived in the born 1855, died 1936. So this is old school kind of sociology, social theory. There are these German terms, Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. Have you ever heard of these?
I've heard them, but I couldn't tell you what they mean.
So Gemeinschaft is this term that's kind of used to loosely translated to kind of community, and Gesellschaft. Gesellschaft, I think, is community. Anyway, I'm getting them a little bit mixed up, but one of them refers to Gemeinschaft is community, Gesellschaft is more society. Okay, so Gemeinschaft is like that nature of interaction that's more community oriented. Sort of, the kind of when you interact with someone and it's more reciprocity, more kind of, someone offers to help you do something and, as a kindness. And then, so Gesellschaft is more transactional. Okay. And he used these terms to describe facets of society. And so like a smaller community like there has more that Gemeinschaft, that sort of where, hey, we're going to give you these old kids' clothes that we have. We're going to help you out. We're going to help one another out. Whereas they're used to living in more of an urban setting where everything's much more transactional, right? They're used to buying everything, and you hire someone to do something. And, and when those things cross one another, when the expectations kind of are not in alignment with what's going on, it creates awkward situations. Like the example I always give is, imagine if someone invited you to a nice holiday dinner. Right here in the U.S., we have Thanksgiving that we often do. If someone invited you to Thanksgiving dinner, and at the end of dinner you got out your wallet and said, "Well, great, thanks. How much do I owe you?" Right? You would have offended that person, right? And that offense is because it's a Gemeinschaft situation, and you responded in a Gesellschaft sort of a way, right? So I think part of what's going on here is they're coming from that much more transactional urban society kind of a way, and they view interactions with other community members in more other people in the community are people you buy things from, right? Or that you pay for services. Whereas in a smaller community, there are certainly those businesses, but you have relationships even with the people who work at those businesses. And yes, there's the transactions, but there's also a lot of kind of kindness. And, I live in a smaller community than I've ever lived in before. And I've noticed kind of here, right? There's the people even who work at the local businesses are also people I'm friendly with outside of that. And it kind of creates a different dynamic. So there's a little social theory from Dr. Camo there that I think was kind of part of what was going on here.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because my wife is English, and she does very much have that sort of Gesellschaft take on things. And there have been times, because I'm from a smaller community and I'm Canadian, I have had someone will do something for us, and she'll say, "Well, I'm going to give them some money for it," and I say, "No, you can't do that. that would be an insult to that person. I mean, if you want to get them a little gift as a thank you, sure, you can do that, but you cannot give them money. And it was a while before she kind of went, oh, okay, I get it. But at first she's just like, no, I'm just going to give him $100. Like, no, that is that is a massive insult. This person did something nice for you. They don't actually expect anything in return. We're just going to get them a little something as a gesture. And it's never occurred to me that I mean, it makes sense. There's a term for it, but watching the English characters in the film now, I realize that's probably not just a city thing, but a cultural thing as well.
Rin says, "Oh, white people," right? In terms of yeah. Dominant members of dominant groups, as we call them in sociology, often have a tendency to act that way.
Interesting. Yeah, no, we certainly do.
Jenny Umanya says, agree, a gesture is better sometimes. Yep, 100%. And like when someone does a kindness and then you offer them money, yeah, it makes them feel like you see them as, labor instead of, but they did something as a kindness, right? So it can really be offensive. Rin is saying, for city people, there's a need to feel safe and protected in oneself. Small towns find safety in the community. Yeah. You live in a small community, absolutely. Knowing people and being known is something that helps you feel safe in small communities. That's a great point.
Yeah. I was saying this to a friend of mine the other day. I've been in Montreal now for 7 months, maybe a little bit more. And I've noticed that one of the things that's changed in me is I'm much more callous towards people asking for change. And I mean, obviously I grew up in a small town. You talk to everybody. I mean, I made friends with, in Victoria, I made friends with a dude who used to busk or panhandle for change down by the harbor. I would sit down with him sometimes when he was panhandling and just shoot the shit and talk to him. But here, after 7 months of living in a full-on city, I've just noticed I've become much more callous about these things. And I was talking to my friend, and my friend said, that's just a city thing. And it never occurred to me, but I guess that makes sense because you are so much more surrounded by people and their problems and their needs. You just sort of develop this thicker skin to separate yourself from it.
Before I moved here where I'm at now, I always lived in large metropolitan areas. And I think part of it is also, and I have a bit of that myself. I mean, I will give a little bit when I'm encountered by someone who asks, but I'm also got that little guarded bit. And you also, if you live in a larger city, you get approached very often for that.
Sure.
Also, yeah. So there's also that element, and there's a point where it's like, well, I'm going to start having to ask for money if I give money to every single time I'm asked. But there becomes some different. So we create different boundaries in a city. Someone who I studied under for social theory actually talked about. He did research on this or published paper on this. And he talked about these sort of buffers that we create. Like for example, in the United States, New Yorkers have this reputation as being unfriendly, right? And really, it's not that they're like unkind people. It's just culturally, when you're rubbing up against so many people every day, stopping to take someone's time is actually, with so many people around, is kind of viewed as rude or unkind. Because if, like here where I'm at, you walking down the street, you see someone, you go, hey, how you doing? Because that's what you do here in the small town South. But if you say, hey, how you doing to people in New York City, and they got to stop to answer you, and then if everyone does that, like you've just wasted a whole lot of people's time, so like, it's not that people are unkind in those situations. It's just something about that proximity and interacting with lots of people and rubbing up against a lot of people, figuratively and literally speaking. You just kind of have to have those sort of buffers that just to make it work. So some interesting dynamics when you think about urban versus rural life.
Oh yeah. It also makes me think too about people who get bent out of shape when celebrities won't hang out with them when they run into them in the street. They run into Will Ferrell or someone, and they won't give them the time of day, and they get all butthurt about it. But the fact is, when you've got people who come up to you constantly, at some point you have to draw a line, because otherwise you just, there's nothing left of you and your time, because people, they don't see it that way. Again, they're locked into themselves. Well, I just want this one thing. The homeless guy just wants 2 minutes of my time, 25 of my cents. But so does the guy after him, and the guy after him, and the guy after him. And it's, as you say, it's a sort of a fascinating dynamic Because I mean, in my hometown, everyone knew the homeless guy. There's maybe 2 or 3 of them. We literally knew them by name.
Right.
You know, oh, that's Les over there, or that's Milkshake Harry was another guy, or the ghost of John Lennon. You know, like we know. I mean, we didn't always know their names. There's Mona. You know, some of them we knew their names, but yeah, you knew them. And here, you know, again, I've been here 7 months, and I'm someone who, I mean, I've still bought the odd burger for a homeless guy, but at a much lower rate than I had, and I never took the time to get to know any of them. And I mean, some of that may also be COVID changes. I don't know, but
Derek saying, I never realized how much of a jerk I was till I moved to a place as small as Victoria, coming from growing up in the 4th largest city in the U.S. Yeah.
Right, because you're from Houston, aren't you, Derek? If I remember correctly.
Houston is a large, sprawling place. Yeah, and I think, I mean, there is an adjustment when you go to a smaller place because, you know, I'm in a community of 17,000 people, which isn't tiny, but it's small compared to the Dallas-Fort Worth area and the Phoenix area and San Francisco Bay Area where I lived up until this point. So, yeah, I'm saying Houston, yes. So, yeah, some adjustments. I want to take things in a little bit different direction, if that's all right. I want to talk a little bit more about the lore. Respectfully, of course, right? But the Far Derek, I really enjoyed the lore in this. I enjoyed the you know, everything leading up to it. I did just a little quick kind of cursory reading on the lore of the Far Derek, and I did think it was interesting. There's sort of an Irish. They called them the Red Caps, right? Which is but there's sort of an Irish variant of the Red Cap, because the Red Cap is a regional sort of folklore. And what I found interesting was that the Irish Far Derek are more practical jokers than actually murderous leprechauns, as they were kind of presented, whereas the English version of the Red Cap, the Powery, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, are the more malevolent and violent. So it was interesting that I don't know if they were intentionally kind of pulling from one, or if they just said, hey, let's take these Far Derek and make them murderous red-capped leprechauns. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or experience with that lore to kind of speak to that.
I can't speak to the lore, but I know that in interviews, the director has said they wanted to subvert the leprechaun trope. So they wanted to subvert kind of the happy little guy who, you know, the cliche leprechaun. So that's why they went with the particularly violent interpretation of the Far Derek, was to cast an opposition to how Ireland is often depicted. Because I mean, Ireland, God help us, you know, I mean, there's an Irish pub I drink in, not far from my apartment here, and I mean, it's more akin to, say, a traditional Irish pub that you might find in some place like Temple Bar. I mean, okay, that's very touristy, but this is a pretty touristy place. But you know, some of these places that you see Irish bars in North America, they're festooned with fucking leprechaun iconography and this very cartoonish version of what it means to be Irish. And I know Irish people hate it. You know, they are not fans of this shit. Especially around Dublin, they'll do it because that's what people go there for, but they're not fans of it. So yeah, Wright has said he chose that version of the Far Derek to sort of push back against those cliches and expectations of what it is to be Irish and what Irish folklore can be. Interesting.
What are your thoughts on the ending? That was an interesting twist. What were your thoughts on that?
One of the things they talked about, or that Wright talked about in some of the interviews I read, was that he wants to show that, to ask yourself, what lengths will you go to defend your family? And of course, you know, in our heads, we always go to that ultra violent, you know, bro, I see red and bodies will hit the floor and shit will go down. But ultimately, Jamie's revealed to be a coward. You know, he's not capable of that kind of conflict. Whereas Maya, she really has to give of herself, but she discovers that she is capable of that. So I thought it was pretty ballsy. What do you think?
I mean, I liked that they kind of had Maya end up being the person who had the wherewithal, right? For lack of a better term. She was certainly the one who took action. And I think that certainly subverted some of the cliche, you know, kind of idea of the male figure saving everyone. So I didn't mind that part of it, her kind of being more the key figure and the figure who kind of took action and, you know, took care of daddy.
That when a grown man tells you to fucking call him daddy and you're not doing fuck stuff, no, absolutely not.
Right.
That family was a whole color guard competition of red flags.
Whew, yes, indeed. The very ending part is the part that I'm kind of uncertain what I think about with the sort of ritual with her kind of becoming the new, you know, mama Redcap, you know.
Yeah.
I'm like, what was going on there? I mean, you know, I kind of get that, you know, spoilers if you haven't seen it already. Sorry, but what are you listening to this for, right? If you care concerned about spoilers, right? So you know, they find who was essentially, I guess, Jamie's cousin. I guess it was, but much older cousin who had been the baby, who was then Mama Redcap in the cairn or whatever you want to call where they lived. And, you know, so she, you know, she kills her and Maya kills her, and then, you know, and everything that happens, and she gets her baby back, all that stuff. And then she kind of they start worshiping her almost, and they call her, you know, Mama Redcap, I think. And then there's this weird ceremony with, you know, blood and, you know, and certainly part of the lore about Redcaps, the British version in particular, blood is a key thing. You know, that I think one of the things I read was one variant of the lore is that their caps are red because they're kind of covered in blood from whoever they kill, and if their cap goes blood of their
enemies.
Right, and if the cap goes dry, they die. There's one variant of the lore. So it wasn't surprising that blood was a part of that. In fact, I was maybe thought it was more interesting that it wasn't a bigger part of the film, although I guess the liver had to be bloody, so that was part of that. But like whatever's going on there, where something weird's going on with that ceremony, almost supernatural, and she's embracing that, and Jamie's kind of embracing that. Are they now going to be like, are the Fardera going to be their minions now? Something about that felt weird, like how gleeful they were to partake in this really weird ceremony. What are your thoughts on that?
I took it that Jamie was not happy about it.
Okay.
That Jamie, like, he was not on board. I think because it's sort of, he has had to relinquish his position as protector of the family, because Maya is the one Maya is literally anointed in blood because she was able to do what he wasn't. You know, she was able to sacrifice, and she had to kill the previous Mother Redcap in order to get her baby back. She literally did the thing he said he would do. You know, I'll kick asses and I'll take down names, and you know, he eventually does stand up for himself, but not to the same degree. And I don't think he was on board. And I think like Maya's acceptance of it is her stepping into that, realizing that, you know, this has changed me and I am become a different person. I think she, you know, if you had to look down the road, I mean, again, it's meant to be symbolic. The film just ends there, but I think it's not a relationship that can last, because I think Jamie will always feel lesser than, because she has chosen to move into that, to become of the place, to move into that space where you have to give blood in order to get blood. And again, I don't know that he's capable of it in the same way.
Rin saying all talk, no trousers, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
I did. Now that is interesting, because like this is Jamie's kind of ancestral home of sorts, right? He inherited this place, and I hadn't thought of it that way, but like Maya is now becoming like almost as though she is symbolically more embraced by his home than he is. So like if he already wasn't feeling somehow emasculated or whatever the hell you want to call it, right, by the fact that he, you know, wasn't able to protect. And I know there's some problematic aspects of some of the hypermasculinity kind of things in there. But, if he wasn't already feeling insecure about how that all went down, here he is in what is supposed to be, we're going to my home, right? This is where I'm from. And all of a sudden she's now, Mama Redcap, right? She's kind of been embraced by the wee people. And he's like, what the hell, right? So I want to kind of use that to segue to one of maybe the critiques of the film. Some of the reviews
Sure.
I've read talked about this, and I agree with this. That the ending was kind of tonally weird. It was to me, and it speaks. I think one of the critiques I've read in reviews, and again I agree with it, is that the film was inconsistent in its tone. Certainly it ventured into the psychology and aftermath of violence and the feeling of helplessness. And that was really interesting how it approached that. But then there were notes of humor, points where it was kind of getting into that kind of funny thing, especially with the Fardarig. They possessed almost kind of an absurdity that was reminiscent of the Gremlins to me, at points in terms of how they conducted themselves. And then there were also points that were truly creepy particularly before you start to see the Fardarig, like really creepy elements, and scary elements. And it felt like these tones were all present in nearly equal measure. And I think that would have been benefited if they leaned more heavily into one of them and maybe had much more subtle notes of the others. Like it either needs to be Gremlins or it needs to be creepy, and not both, or not trying to be both, because then it fails a little bit at being both. And then the humor with the kind of the psychology of violence and the fear of that almost offset each other, and not in a way that was a tension release, but rather in a way that undermined each other. So, and then the whole ending there. So I feel like tonally, that's probably its biggest kind of weakness as a film, that it didn't seem to stick to the right tone, and it tried to blend those things into equal of measure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that was one place where the film fell short. I think you're right. It was trying to hit too many different levels and not tying them together. Like again, that home invasion scene, that was rough. That was really rough. And then, as you say, there's the Whelans are kind of goofy until they're not.
Yeah.
Again, apparently they pitched it as, when they were getting financing, Gremlins meets Straw Dogs. That's sort of how they did it. And as you say, if the Whelans had been cartoonishly shitty, then I think it would have been easier. But I actually really hated them the first time I watched it. I was able to relax into it a little more the second time, but for some reason the Whelans really got my hackles up. And as you say, the psychological angst of what they had gone through and trying to cope with these things, it did clash a little bit with the more violent shit towards the end.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, Gremlins, in retrospect, Gremlins is like a much darker movie than you might remember. I don't know if you've seen it in recent years, but it's a very angry movie.
It is. I think Gremlins 2 is a little more the absurd kind of installment. The first one is a little, Derek is saying, was seeing Commander O'Brien from Star Trek and Hodor from Game of Thrones distracting to you? Because when I saw the trailer, I was like, really? These guys are in this? Yeah. I mean, I think I said out loud, or certainly put in my notes when I saw, Christian Nairn, the actor. I'm like, Hodor. But also and I wish I got a screen capture of this, but I didn't. But when they go to the pub, there's a guy in there that looks like J.R.R. Martin too. One of the locals. Seamus, I think it was his name or something. Anyway, so it's like, oh, J.R.R. Martin's in here as well.
George R.R. Martin.
George R.R. Martin. Sorry, yeah.
That's what he's doing instead of writing the final books.
Right, exactly. He's acting. I got my authors confused, but yeah, George R.R. Martin. Then Cole Meany, Daddy Whitten, was in Star Trek Next Generation. So, the family, they not a fan, not a fan at all of the Whalen family in this film.
No, there's a particularly disgusting scene that I'm not going to bother describing, but with one of them is sitting on a toilet and starts just going through Jamie and Maya's stuff.
Yes.
And it's just gross. It's just the worst. Just the worst.
Yeah.
And yeah, that again, they were a little too, I guess, again, if you wanted to make them despicable, then it worked. But man, I particularly hated the brother and sister. One of them who's played by one of the characters' name is Ashlyn, but she was played by I don't
Jamie
remember her
Lee
name.
O'Donnell.
Yeah, from Dairy Girls, and she's really funny in Dairy Girls. But I just wanted to put her and her brother in a cannon and fire them into the ocean. I can't stand that. You know, we are strong and proud because of our birthright bullshit when actually we're lazy pikers. Because I knew too many of those people growing up who just, again, were like, oh, you know, I'm a man's man because I'm from this place and I love this place. Do you do anything to enrich this place? No, go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
So no, I'm with you there. Well, I guess we're bringing it in for a landing here. We've got about 6 minutes left, Joseph. Is there anything else you wanted to hit?
I think I hit on everything that to me stood out. Overall, again, I enjoyed the film though. It was a lot of fun. I did not find myself bored at any point in the film, even despite some of the kind of the tonal misses that it had.
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to mention was how much I liked the way they lit the back garden of Jamie and Maya's house, because that's the place where the real world butts up against the world of the Fardarig. And I mean, apparently the whole house was on a massive set. So everything, the house, the interiors and exteriors were all on a set in England, whereas all the exteriors were Ireland. Okay. But the house was a massive set, so they were able to kind of light it in, you know, however they choose. And it really just, everything the way that was lit, everything popped in a different way. It made it seem more real than real. And I loved that way of what I felt was like an intentional way of delineating this place where the magical meets the mundane. And I really quite liked that. And whenever, of course, the Fardarig were around or were doing their thing, especially in the daytime, there were these little lens flares, these subtle little lens flares that kind of clued you into, we in the mundane world or are we in the magical world? And I appreciated that. Like when Neve at the beginning, when she's talking about, you got to feed these guys, there's just a couple little spots of flare on her forehead. And so it's this sense of like they're around, but they're not there. You know, it was subtle, but I appreciated it. That's pretty much it for me. So I guess that sums up our thoughts on Jon Wright's Unwelcome. And you can rent that pretty much anywhere you rent your films. It's on VOD right now. I'm sure it'll hit streaming at some point, but you know, it's $5-6 out of your pocket. It's a great movie. It's about 107 minutes, so you got enough movie for your buck. And I also recommend the same director's film, Grabbers. I watched that. It's on Prime in Canada. It is a shit ton of fun. It's an Irish horror comedy about a monster that arrives in a seaside village who is allergic to alcohol. So everyone realizes that in order to stay alive, they have to get piss drunk.
That's great.
It's a lot of fun. So thank you to everyone for hanging out with us tonight. Again, we love seeing you guys in the chat. You guys make it all worth it. Thanks to everyone who's been downloading the show. We're actually charting in 2 countries. So thanks to everyone. And again, if you want to listen to the show, and the audio of this will be out in 2 weeks' time, and the audio only episode for Freeze, which is a really fun Lovecraftian inspired Arctic epic, that just dropped. So you can check all that out on the Weird Together feed. Joseph, do you have any messages before we go out?
Real quick, Derek saying Grabbers is awesome. And then Rin saying heart. And thanks, guys. We appreciate you all hanging out with us for sure. Definitely appreciate that.
Yes, sir. So, Joseph, where can everyone find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at JOKOMO13, Jokomo13. You can find me on YouTube at The Cardinal Rule if you happen to be interested in American football. And obviously here doing Weird Together with Brennan Storr. All right. I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Largely the Truth. I'm also on Blue Sky, which is still an invite only, but if you're on Blue Sky, come find me there. That is said to be the Twitter killer. I don't think it will be, but hey, it was free, so I got to go on. I'm also on T2, which is yet another Twitter killer, which won't be. But again, if you are on either of those platforms, come find me. Otherwise, I'm on the Ghost Story Guys podcast, wherever you get
well, wherever fine podcasts live, basically. I was thinking, oh, that's an edit. Nope, you're live. You can't do that. So finally, if you want to shoot us an email, you can find us at weirdtogethershow@gmail.com. That's weirdtogethershow@gmail.com. And if you have any comments, questions, we would love to read them. We'll read them out on the show. We just had a message from our listener Sharona on the last show. And yeah. Oh, of course, one last thing. All music on this show is composed and performed by the Revenants. The Revenants are a project of the Boston-based musician Elliot Wilder, and you can find all their music streaming everywhere you get your tunes, courtesy of Night Harvest Recordings, which is a Ghost Story Guys house label. Until next time, remember, we're weird.
And you're weird.
So why not be weird together? Thanks, folks.
Let me ride.